Thank you for listening to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast, available on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Stitcher. Also, please follow Matt's Movie Reviews on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Reddit, Instagram, and MeWe. And of course, be sure to visit mattsmoviereviews.net for the latest reviews, top 10 lists, and more. Now, on to the show.
Came in here yesterday asking about a two-man crew, white and black, operating South Shore in Boston.
We got guys actively searching for us.
Come on, man, we need to get moving. We're not supposed to be here anymore.
Just go! Just take your guns and go, man! Just don't kill me, please! Come on, man!
There are crooks, and there are corporate crooks. One of them gets fed time or a bullet to the head. The other one gets a tennis court prison if he gets anything at all.
Tonight's a big night for you. I'm hoping you're a smart man. Man who knows he's got one life, one chance at all this, and he better make the most of it. A man who knows loyalty's for the weak. Well, tonight, it's time to put the lies to bed. Tonight, you will decide what kind of man you're gonna be.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 499. Out now on digital and video on demand is How to Rob, a Boston-set crime drama in which two lifelong friends and career criminals find themselves on the run when one of their heists angers the wrong people. A film about brotherhood and loyalty, toyed with gritty realism in the mean streets of Boston. How to Rob also marks the latest feature film by director Peter Horgan, who we're glad to say joins me now on the podcast. Peter, how are you today?
I'm good, Matt. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. You know, this is a really interesting film in that, yeah, it's a crime series, it's a crime movie. It's set in Boston, but I think the themes, really universal. And I think the thing that really kind of spoke to me is about the friendships that we have in our lives, sometimes from the time like we're kids, right? There's some friends that you grow up with and such. But there's that thing that I call the drift. People kind of drift apart. Sometimes that's intentional. Sometimes the friends that you had don't really grow in the same maturity that you do. And you're kind of like left to make choices in your life about who you hang out with. I'm just curious, was that something that really spoke to you in regards to making this movie? Is that something that really kind of, that idea of things drifting apart, really kind of, was that the genesis of the idea of How to Rob as we see it today?
Yeah, absolutely. That had a lot to do with it. I think that was something that was really difficult for me growing up. And like you said, growing apart from certain people that you were so close with growing up. And it was a difficult thing for me to process. And at times I really resisted it, even though maybe deep down I knew it was time to move on in certain relationships. We were just going in two completely different directions. And sometimes I would stay around a lot longer than I probably should. And in certain circumstances where I had some of my friends that I grew up with were getting into, things that were, dangerous in certain ways, so that I really didn't want any part of. But I found things like loyalty and just the amount of years you have going into these relationships, just keeping me present and keeping me around for things that I didn't really want to be around for. And I think that, this is kind of like a story about what if you couldn't break away? What if you couldn't leave? What if you felt so tied to a person that no matter how bad things got, you just couldn't bring yourself to walk away? And I don't know. I think recently, in recent years, I forget if I read this or heard this. Sorry, I don't know what's going off. But something about, you can still love people for relationships that you used to have. And you don't need to necessarily hold on to that relationship. Sometimes it just naturally fades, but you can still love a person for what they were to you at a certain point in your life. And that was, a lot of very comforting for me. But it's definitely something I've thought about a lot and I've dwelled on a lot. And it was kind of the jumping off point for this film.
But there's a great monologue in the movie about the positive and negative forces that can have in people's lives. And I mean, like you said, you can love someone, but they can be a really destructive force to you as well. And I think what's happening with Sean and Jimmy in this movie is that that destructive force that is essentially Jimmy. I mean, Jimmy is he's one of those kind of characters that's like a wild card, very much, right? You don't know where he's going to go, and Sean's very much. He's got a girl, he's got a business, he wants to settle himself down, and I was curious. Have you ever thought about what would have happened with Sean if he never met Jimmy? I mean, is there ever a multiverse where if Sean never met Jimmy, what his life would be? Would he even be in the place where he's at in that life where Jimmy wasn't there? Because there's one thing about loyalties when it comes to friendship, but Jimmy essentially almost kind of saved his life in a certain way when they were younger.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I haven't explored that. What I did explore was, when we were in like the very early days of COVID, and we were all in lockdown, I ended up actually writing the screenplay into a novel that I never did anything with. I'm like very insecure about my prose, and I didn't do anything with it, but it was a really good exercise for me since I was planning on making this film, to dive deeper into the backgrounds of these two characters. And, they both came from broken homes. But I think Sean's home, even though it was broken in ways, I think it was a little bit more healthy relationships going on. So I do think in ways that Jimmy was a bit of a detriment, even though, he came through for him in this big moment early on in their childhood. And he gave Sean a friend in a time when he didn't have any friends. And I'm sorry, because I'm trying to mute. I have no idea how to mute these messages that keep popping up on here.
There's nothing on my end, so it's all good.
Oh, okay. But I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. But yeah, I never explored the idea of them not being together. I think what was interesting for me was not something I realized early on in the process, because you can have an antagonist to a film and you can have a villain to a film, and they don't necessarily need to be the same character. Sometimes your antagonist and your villain are two entirely different characters. And, instinctively you think, oh, well, like the hitman, like Anthony and Benny D are the antagonists of the film because they're the ones who are coming after Sean and Jimmy. But, the more and more I looked at the script, I realized, oh, Jimmy is actually Sean's real antagonist here. Sean just wants to better his life. From the moment we meet him as an adult, he just wants out. He just wants legitimacy to his life. And Jimmy is that main factor, just pushing him the other way the entire time. So yeah, that was an interesting discovery for me, to think that like the antagonist is actually his best friend, and he's the person who is holding him back.
I never viewed the hitmen as antagonists myself. So I saw them as the consequence. And that saying that's going around, play stupid games, win stupid prizes, right? I mean, that's very much the Jimmy motto, I think, of his life. Yes. Because and that's how I saw them. I want to talk about the actors who play Jimmy and Sean. So you have Joshua Koopman and Shaneza Uche. Now, Koopman, you've worked with before. I mean, from everything I've read of you and the interviews I've heard of you, you guys are like really good friends. Do you write roles with him in mind when you put in a movie together?
Almost always. And for this one, definitely. So this was my first feature, actually. And I wrote, I think, a dozen feature screenplays prior to writing How to Rob. And when I got out of college, I was given this really sound advice, which is that if you want to break through in this industry, find a genre that you love and become the best at it. And that's how you're going to get your foot in the door, is by mastering a genre first, and then you can expand from there. And for me, it's always been the crime genre. I've always just been in love with crime films, whether, in every single subgenre of crime, I've just been fascinated with it since I was a kid. So in all of those dozen screenplays, there's always a role for Josh Koopman in there, with the hopes that one day I get to make these films with much bigger budgets than what How to Rob had. So then when I wrote How to Rob, I had taken the lessons I learned from writing those first 12 screenplays, and I kind of reverse engineered the screenplay around people, places, and props I knew I could get for free or for cheap. Like actors I had worked with before, established relationships with, who I knew would either be willing to take less than their normal fees or maybe even waive their fees on the film. And so I wrote these parts of Sean and Jimmy for Josh and Chinaza. Chinaza I didn't know as well as Josh going into it, but Josh and I, back in 2015, had attempted to get another feature film made. And at that time, it was I like this dynamic of having like the wild card best friend and kind of like the more straight man protagonist. And it was a very similar dynamic to that. And in that film, I was having Josh play the straight man, and we were thinking about who's going to play your best friend in this. And Josh had said, one of my best friends in New York is this guy, Chinaza Uche. We did theater together and he's incredible. You should meet him. He would be really great for this other role. So we did. And this was back in, like I said, 2015, I think. And I met Chinaza. Him and Josh and I went to the Austin Film Festival together just to hang out, see some movies, and meet each other. And I got along really well with Chinaza, but on top of that, I saw their chemistry that they had. And I knew right then, I'm like, yeah, I have to have these guys play friends in movies because they're just so much fun to be around in real life. The two of them just play off of each other, and they're such a good time. And I knew it was something tangible that we could see on screen. So when I was writing How to Rob, and I had this idea of writing this story about these two friends who had this deep, deep relationship, I knew I wanted it to be them. So yeah. Now I'm finding myself writing things for Chinaza as well, just because I loved working with him so much and he did such a great job. But I've always been, Josh and I go so far back that if you look at any of those screenplays I've written, he might not be the lead in every single one of them, but there's usually a place in there for him somewhere.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you'll love. The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon. The world's leading online store, Amazon is your first stop to buy a wide range of products at competitive prices with fast delivery times. Amazon is also a world-class entertainment hub that includes Prime Video, Audible, Twitch, Amazon Music, and more. Sign up with Amazon today and experience the best in online shopping and entertainment. Please support Matt's Movie Reviews on Patreon. Get access to exclusive content, request movie reviews and top 10 lists, and help support my work. Please click on the Patreon link in the description below. I heard in an interview that you said that prior to filming, when both Chinaza and Koopman had the script, they would actually call you up and say, I'm not sure if my character would say this or say that, etc.
Yeah.
It does take a certain level of trust, doesn't it, for number one, them to be able to call you and hear that, but also for you to hear them out in that as well. Do you think with future projects, that's definitely going to be something that's going to be there as well, that kind of rapport between the three of you, where they will be more comfortable to come up to you and say, look, I see what you got here, but I think maybe we can add this or twist that or do a little something different?
Absolutely. I think it's not even just about the three of us. For me as a director, I feel like you can't have an ego in filmmaking. I feel that, for me anyways, the best way to go about it is the best idea wins, and that's it. And it doesn't matter who it comes from. And when you're working on set with people, that idea could come from literally any department on the set. Someone just throws an idea out there, And if it's better than mine, then why would I ignore it? Like I'll throw out whatever I originally had in a heartbeat to take a better idea from someone else. It's only going to make me look better, if I'm the director here. So with Josh and Chinaza, the benefit is they both have writer brains on top of being actors. I know Chinaza does some writing. I know Josh has done some writing before. So they're both storytellers, and not every actor has that. I'll hear anybody out. If anyone has suggestions for me that I'm working with, actor or any other department on set, I'll always listen to them, and I just kind of go with my gut. And when they came to me and they brought up these points, more often than not, it made sense to me, and it was easy for me to make the changes because I saw exactly what they meant, and they were right. And then sometimes on set, people will throw out ideas the same way and say, well, this line is it's kind of clunky, or I'm kind of tripping over these words right here. What if I say it like this? And as long as the message is still coming across the same and it's not changing the dynamic within the scene, then I'm 99% of the time going to say yes to it. There's really no reason. I'm not very precious about the words as long as the same message is coming across. I mean, for instance, with like the two hitmen characters, Anthony and Benny D, they're played by Anthony Farrakano and Damian DePaula, and they're both guys from the North End in Boston. And that's it's changed now. All of Boston's changed now, but that traditionally was an Italian American neighborhood, and still has a little bit of that left to it, but it's also been gentrified and taken over by like college students. And but anyways, I gave them their lines, Anthony and Damien, and they were just like, nah, we wouldn't say this. Like one point I said, have you seen their apartment? They probably have jack shit. And they're like, would we say jack shit? No, we'd say Stugats. It would be Stugats. It wouldn't be jack shit. So, okay, we'll say Stugats then. Like that, like I said, I'm not precious about that stuff. I want it to feel real. And if that's going to make it feel more real for them, chances are it's going to be more real for the audience as well.
You filmed this in Quincy, Boston. Is that correct?
We filmed it all over Massachusetts. I mean, the story mainly takes place in Quincy because that's where I've been living for, about 5 years at that time. And also kind of a little bit of an ode to the Friends of Eddie Coyle, which is predominantly, Quincy film. Even though a lot of it takes place in Boston, a lot of those scenes are in Quincy. And but we shot a little bit in Quincy, but we shot in downtown Boston. We shot in Medford, which is like a neighborhood on the north side of Boston. We shot on the Cape quite a bit as well, which is where I'm from originally. And it's just the time of year we shot. We shot in May, and the Cape at that point isn't flooded with tourists yet. So it's actually a little bit easier to move around down there in terms of traffic and just people, the amount of people there. So we shot a lot of scenes, a lot of interiors down on the Cape just to help us make our days, because it was easier for us to pick up and move from one location to the next without dealing with like the rush hour traffic you get when you're closer to the city.
Something you mentioned before is that you use the places that the establishments, places you've been to before, as kind of like your kind of like set pieces for your film, which is I spoke to a lot of indie filmmakers, and that's like a real smart, resourceful way to go about getting stuff done. With that in mind, do you keep a diary? Do you keep images? Do you, when you go through your travels or you're just walking around Boston and stuff, do you like keep a mental image or physical stuff about it? Like, hey, one day I like maybe to do stuff in there, one day I like to maybe to do stuff in there. Do you have that stuff kind of like in an arsenal of like set places that you can set scenes in and stories in?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I keep these little moleskin notebooks on me at all times, just because I got tired of coming up with ideas and forgetting them down the line. So I write everything in there, but I do kind of keep just like a mental Rolodex of all these places. I think that comes from, I used to do music. I used to direct music videos when I first got out of college for like Boston rappers mainly. And that was kind of my pitch when I would go to them. A lot of these rappers didn't have money, or had very, very small amounts of money to give me. So what I would always say to them is like, well, what do you have that's cool that would up our production value? Do you have a bunch of friends we can get to be in the background? Is there a cool location you know about that we've never been, that hasn't been in another Boston music video? You got nice cars. Like, what do you have that we can show on here that makes it look like we spent money on this? So with How to Rob, it was actually, there was an Australian coffee shop right near where I work in downtown Boston, and the owner's from Australia, and wicked nice guy. And I would go in there for coffees every day. And I just had an idea that I wanted to do this scene in his coffee shop. And I knew that they were closed on the weekends because that particular area of Boston is like a financial district area. It's really just busy Monday through Friday. So they weren't even open on the weekends. So I asked him, hey, would you mind us coming in here and shooting this movie? And he was all about it and very, very accommodating. Same thing with the bar scenes. The bar is a bar probably 5 minutes from where I grew up. And I just went and I spoke to the manager one day and I said, I grew up coming and drinking at this bar all the time, and I'm not here a lot anymore because I live a little further away now, but we'd love to come shoot in here. And in Massachusetts, filmmaking is still kind of a novelty. People are excited about it. People get really interested when they hear that you're making movies. People want to help you here. I think that's something that you lose when you go to a place like Los Angeles, where like that's the business and everybody knows that business. Yeah. It's just like everyone wants to be compensated for it, which obviously, like in an ideal world, I would be paying everybody for everything. But when you're making an indie film on a dime, you have to cut corners anywhere you possibly can. And locations is usually one of the places that you do that. I don't think we really paid for a single location in the film. Everything was either favors. And if it wasn't through me directly finding something, I was talking to my family, cousins, aunts, uncles, parents. Josh Koopman also is just like a business owner in Massachusetts, and he has all this other connections going on. So between him and me, we were able to just talk to people. And if it wasn't our direct contacts, it was like a friend of a friend, like the bog scene, for instance, at the end of the film with Jimmy and Judge. That bog, that was my cousin's friend. Like I didn't know how I was going to get a bog, but I knew there was enough of them that I must know someone who knew a person. So I started asking around, and my cousin's like, oh yeah, I know somebody who's got a cranberry bog. We'll go shoot there. And it worked out.
And I just want to make a note before we continue on that I did say Quincy and not Quincy. So I hope that gives me some brownie points with the people in Boston there.
That's big. I got corrected myself when I moved there because I was saying Quincy, and my buddy who's from there, he's like, nah, that's not right. It's Quincy. And Quincy. And we I was nervous about the accents in this film because I like reading film critique. Anytime I watch a film, I usually go and look up a couple of reviews. And whenever you see Boston films, everybody loves to critique actors' Boston accents.
Yeah.
Like even when you have like people who are from here, people are still critiquing their accents somehow. The reality is the Boston accent changes from neighborhood to neighborhood. Guys from the North End don't speak the same as guys from Dorchester or guys from Southie. Like different boroughs have kind of different variations of that accent. So rather than, we didn't have money for rehearsal time and to pay people to like dedicate months and months to this project. So I just said, if it's a natural accent, keep it. If you don't have the natural accent, just speak how you normally speak. The one rule was Quincy had to be properly said. Quincy.
It's interesting. I was going to ask about the accent, and I mean, what I've heard you say in making the film is that you didn't want anyone actually faking a Boston accent either. You wanted to make sure that if they can't do it, don't do it. Which is something that I can understand because, someone has heard a lot of bad Australian accents in Australian films. I can really understand that as well. Sure. I'm curious, though, that when it comes to the Boston crime movie, And cinema has a really long tradition of, movies set in Boston, and we can go through all of them. It seems to me, though, that recently the very, very prolific era was between 2005 when Mystic River came out and 2010 when The Town came out. I think in those 5 years, like it seemed like almost every Dennis Lehane book was adapted, and there were so many Boston films. When you're making a film in Boston and you're making it as realistic as you can using real locations, etc., what are some of the things that you don't want to do in your Boston film that other Boston films do? Because sometimes I think when it comes to making a Boston film or a New York film or a film setting here in Australia in the Northern Territory, there are certain things that people always do that let you know, hey, you're watching a Boston film. Is there anything that you didn't want to do to put those kind of markers out there?
I don't know if there was anything I was actively trying to avoid, because I'm, super inspired by most of those films. Dennis Lehane is like my favorite author. I've read everything he's ever written, and I've loved a lot of the adaptations that have come from his novels. Gone Baby Gone is one of my favorite Boston films, I think.
Yeah, and I think Gone Baby Gone to me is very much a film that I think with How to Rob is in the same kind of wavelength of films right there. I really do believe that, because there's an authenticity to it as well, and I think a lot of it has to do with the people making it as much as anything else.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's a huge compliment, and I love Mystic River too. I think Mystic River is a fantastic adaptation. That's a really great book, and so often you lose a lot from book to screen, and I think Clint Eastwood really did an excellent translation of that. So for me, though, in terms of things I tried to avoid, it wasn't really so much that I was trying to avoid things so much as I was really just trying to make it true to what I know. Right. And like I was thinking about it the other day, I think that there's certain tropes that we kind of subvert in this film, not even intentionally trying to subvert them so much as like, this is a more accurate depiction. And like, I think like The Friends of Eddie Coyle is arguably the most realistic Boston crime film, at least for the time that it was made. If you talk to people from that era, they say that's how it was. That like those were the guys, like blue collar criminals. And my own experiences just from like growing up in Massachusetts and working in the security field at different times in my life and like coming into contact with these types of guys, I just wanted it to be true to that. And I don't know if you want to get into like spoilers or anything, but there's like one scene in particular that would be a significant spoiler here. But
it's really, I try not to do spoilers. It's really up to you as the filmmaker, though, if you want to.
I won't get into it too much, but it was just like, I think that everyone is expecting a big showdown between the protagonist, Sean and Jimmy, and these hitmen who are coming after them. And like, for me, I'm thinking to myself, like, so like, that's just not what happens so often. It's not these big gunfights in the street. It's not these like high octane action sequences. It's deception. It's catching someone off guard. This is how people get killed.
because the whole point of it is that it is an illegal, immoral activity, and people want to keep it on a down low, right? They're not going to have it. It's not going to be a Heat shootout like a Michael Mann film, right?
Yeah, and I love Heat. Heat, and you know what? And I really love The Town too. But if you watch The Town as compared to like The Friends of Eddie Coyle, like The Friends of Eddie Coyle is kind of like the more like real version of The Town, and then The Town clearly takes some inspiration from that film, but adds like the Hollywood blockbuster flair to it. Which maybe one day I will get to make a film like that, but right now the indie nature of the film kind of played towards the realism of everything.
Yeah, but I appreciate the realism though, and I think that's something that really spoke to me when watching a movie, because sometimes you hear the words Boston crime movie and you're like, well, I've seen that because it's been done so many times. But for this film, what for me really stuck out to me was not only the drama, but it's a movie about character. It's a movie about people, and even though these people are criminals, like as I said at the start of my interview, there's universal themes there with regards to friendship and loyalty that I think can be attached to anyone living in any place, and I think that's a really important distinction.
Yeah, and that's what's been connecting with people, I think. And there was other crime films. Actually, there's an Australian crime film, David Michaud's
Animal
Animal Kingdom.
Kingdom. Yeah.
Huge inspiration to me for this film. Like the tone that he captures in that film, and the character dynamics with people like Ben Mendelsohn, who I think is just terrifying in that film. Things like that really inspired me. And I think everything you're saying is right. So
for everyone out there listening, How to Rob, available now on digital and video on demand. I really recommend people check this movie out because I've been singing its praises throughout this interview, and for good reason. Boston set crime drama, great performances, great characters, and Peter Horgan, I thank you so very much for your time. You did a great job here, man. Feature film debut, and I can't wait to see where you get up to next. And as soon as you get something up and rolling, let me know. I'd love to check it out and love to talk to you again.
Yeah, I would love that. Thank you, man. Thank you for all this. I really appreciate all the kind words and you taking the time to talk to me about this.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content. Also, if you would like to request a review and support my work, please join my Patreon via the link in the description below.